I'm your host, Jeremiah, and in this episode we're going to cover the Freedom Arms Model 83 Premier Grade Revolver chambered in .454 Casull. We're going to detail loading, shooting, and development of handloads in this particular firearm. However, before we get to details on the firearm, let's go ahead and go back a little bit and talk about the history, which I think is very rich and interesting. So the cartridge was designed by Dick Casull early on, and the cartridge had nearly 30 years of development before it became the .454 Casull we know and love today. And he started out by hyping up 45 Colt loads in single-action armies to the breaking point, and a lot of good single-action armies were destroyed in the process. So a moment of silence for them. But the end result is the .454 cartridge. After all that development, he finally got it dialed in and hit and checked every box he wanted to. We also get the Freedom Arms Model 83 revolver from this development process because the single action armies were not strong enough to hold up to the pressures he wanted to push. And I think Dick Casull sometimes doesn't get the credit he's due when it comes to developing of the cartridge and the firearm to go with it. You see, Dick Casull was to the .45 Colt what Elmer Keith was to the .44 Magnum. And what I mean by that is Dick Casull went out, started with a .45 Colt, just like Elmer Keith started with the .44 Special, and they both pushed development for a new, hotter cartridge, which we all know and love today. And he went out and founded Freedom Arms, the company, with Wayne Baker, and together they started producing these beautiful revolvers we have today. The legacy is still continued on today by Bob Baker, and it's really nice to see that he's maintaining the quality and legacy of these two individuals and the company. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive right into the revolver and overview some of its features. Taking a closer look here, we have the signature Freedom Arms bright brushed finish on this particular model here, the Premier Grade. And I will note that when it comes to this finish, whatever they do, however they do it, it makes it very easy to clean this particular revolver. You wouldn't even notice that we already have 100 rounds through the 6-gun here. So that's a very nice feature, in my opinion. Also, it has a 6-inch barrel. And it features a 5-shot cylinder. And we'll look at the size of the cartridge and the strength of the revolver, and it makes sense to have a 5-shot cylinder. I refrain to share any numbers, and semi-maximum pressure is set at 65,000 psi for this cartridge. However, I do know that the proof loads are somewhere in the neighborhood of 90,000 psi. That's more than most rifle cartridges' maximum pressure. So it really is a testament to the overall strength and construction of these 6 guns. It features a sliding bar safety here, standard on all Model 83 revolvers. And if you were to hold this up to the light here and focus on the front and the back of the cylinder here, you would see that there is very little to no gap. In fact, when I load this thing and I'm looking for cartridges back here on the back of the cylinder, I can't even see them. And they're kind of recessed into the cylinder here. Also, all the chambers are line bored, and near as I could measure, the cylinder gap measures out to about 1.5 thousandths of an inch. It has extremely tight lockup here. There is little to no cylinder play. Do that on any other revolver and you'll see what I'm talking about. All the chambers are line bored. We have a tight 3-degree forcing cone, and it's constructed of heat-treated 17.4 pH stainless steel. We have very nice adjustable sights here, which is great because you have a wide variety of loads that you can shoot out of this. And in fact, our particular model here also came with a .45 auto cylinder and a .45 Colt cylinder. So we can swap between those two cartridges given they are the same bullet diameter. And with the versatility of loads, let's go ahead and jump over to the hand loading side of things and talk about that for a little bit. So real quick, we'll run through the loading process. We've selected our CBS dies here because that's what our local Sportsman's Warehouse had. I've got the sizing die installed and adjusted down to contact the shell holder. And they're carbide, so you don't need any lubricant. Makes it really nice. Sizing is a pretty simple operation. And if you loaded for 45 Colt, then you can load for the 454 Casull. And also, in spite of what the name says, 454, it does take bullets that are .451 or .452 inches in diameter, cast or jacketed. And so there's 5 pieces, sized, and we'll go ahead and rotate the turret head to our expanding die. And there's a wide variety of bullets that you can use. You've got like these 360 grain cast bullets with a gas check. You've got 250 grain Barnes X pistol bullets. And then you've got this 325 grain Barnes Buster, maybe a 250 grain Nosler jacketed hollow point. So I highly suggest that whichever bullet you choose to load, you expand your case to fit that particular bullet. So for demonstration purposes, we'll be using Nosler jacketed hollow points. So I'm going to go ahead, back this seating stem out, and I'll show you the adjustment process here. I can tell right now that wasn't enough flare. Then I will check the case. There we go. That seats nicely and it's straight, which is very important. So now that I've got that die set, set that little lock ring on top so it doesn't rotate on us. And real quick we'll run through these 5 cases. Use this press a lot, it's got a lot of squeaks. A little oil maybe. So then when it comes to priming, for all our testing, we're going to be using Remington 7.5 small rifle bench rest primers. I like these because they seem to be a little bit hotter than your standard rifle primers. And I've been using a Frankfurt Arsenal hand primer. I think it's super quick. I think it's super easy. Pop the case in, one squeeze, and you're done. This is also a good gauge. It offers really good feel on how tight your primer pockets are, or in some cases, how loose. That's something you should watch for in this 454. Oftentimes the primer pockets will loosen up before the case splits. And of course, we're using Starline brass, exceptional high quality stuff. So I'm not going to show you dumping powder. That's a pretty straightforward process, and I feel it would be redundant. All our powder was dispensed on either a Matchmaster Redding 10X powder measure or a Redding BR30 powder measure, depending on charge weight and what we were doing. So let's go ahead and show you bullet seating now. Lock that in place. Got my bullet here. I want to seat it to the cannelure. And this stem here is way high. Push it down until it contacts the bullet right there. Go down a few turns. And then I'm just going to kind of eyeball it till I get down to the cannelure. And you can see this die is a little dirty. Probably could use a cleaning. But we are almost there. There we're at the cannelure. That looks about right. I'm going to check my overall length here. Make sure I am within spec. Try and show you guys that there. So that looks pretty good to me. I know that'll fit in the cylinder, no problem. And then I like, this is where things get a little tricky, I like to seat all my bullets, set them as straight as I can by eyeballing it in the case there. And I'll go ahead and seat all my bullets, and then I will crimp as a separate step. Now I feel this is important because it offers a more uniform crimp. And crimp, when it comes to this cartridge, is very important. Also, it should be noted that you may have to trim your brass to keep it within that specified length. These cases are just fine, brand new Starline cases. So then I will back this seating stem out quite a bit, and I will loosen this die here, run the case up, screw the die down until it comes in firm contact, and then I'll continue to rotate it. And I feel that the best way to measure your crimp is to take a factory loaded cartridge like this Black Hills, or we even have some of the original Freedom Arms loadings. And then I like to take my calipers here and I will measure the crimp. So I'll come in here like this, take a measurement of the crimp, 0.470 inches, and then I will duplicate that with my hand loads here. So again, screw the die down a touch, and that crimp will creep up on you fast, so you move in small increments. Go ahead and check that. 470 inches. That never happens, that's right on the money. So then I'll go ahead and crimp all the cases. And like I was saying earlier, crimping is important because if you don't have an adequate crimp, there's a couple of things that can happen. The worst thing that can happen is you lose your bullet in the cylinder under recoil. And then it will lock up your cylinder, you won't be able to rotate it. It's a big mess and a pain in the butt to fix. So having adequate crimp, especially with the heavy recoiling loads, is very important. Also, you can get bullet deformation from that bullet slamming back and forth in the cylinder. And I actually have witnessed this firsthand, where the bullet will be scarred on the outer edges as it's being thrust forward under recoil. So, moral of the story, make sure you have adequate crimp. We're also going to be shooting some of these Barnes Xpb bullets, and when I was loading these and putting the powder charges in, I was kind of surprised at how difficult it was to seat these guys. And it was a highly compressed charge of H110 powder, and there's a couple other powders that are also highly compressed with this bullet. So you want to make sure you have adequate crimp on those as well, very important. They're also very stout, very heavy recoiling loads. The Barnes load data is pretty hot, and you can get some pretty impressive velocities. So with that said, we've got all this stuff here, we're loaded up, we're ready to go to the range. I've already preloaded some 454 ammo. I've got some of my pet loads for 45 Colt and 45 ACP, so we can try out these cylinders. And we're going to do all of our testing here on this Ransom International Master Series handgun rest. Now before you call me a wuss, there's a good reason for doing this. Number one, it's repeatable, 100%. It's the accuracy standard for our industry. And also, when it comes to the variety of loads that we're going to shoot through this particular firearm, we want to show you how the revolver will recoil. And the Ransom rest provides a really good reference point for that. A lot better than my wrists do. So let's go hit the range. So to show the difference between light loads and full power 454 loads, we've got one load here with 5.2 grains of Trail Boss, which is going to be the first load, and the second load is going to be 26 grains of H110. They're both using the same exact bullet, 360 grain Oregon Trail wide nose flat point. So let's go ahead and fire this first one and take special note to how far the gun recoils. Here we go. Okay, not bad, not bad at all. I'm gonna reset. Now for the full power load. Here we go. Big difference. Okay, so we are out here on the range now. We have a target set up at 15 yards. Ailer, model 35P chronograph, set up 10 feet from the muzzle. Freedom Arms, model 83 in 454 Casull, locked into the Ransom International Rest. It's a pretty hot day, and according to my Kestrel 5700 here, the temperature is 101 degrees, pressure is 25.25, humidity is 16.8%, so a pretty hot day. This revolver is already warm just from sitting in the sun. But we're going to go ahead and put our first load to the test here. And first up we have a 360 grain bullet from Oregon Trail. This is a wide nose flat point with gas check, sized to .452. We're using Hodgdon Lil Gun powder, a 20 grain charge, and in Starline cases, Remington 7.5 primers, and an overall length of 1.760 inches. So with that said, let's see how they do. I should also note that on this Ransom rest, we removed the stud and acorn nut back here and replaced the football knob with a nut here so the gun could fully recoil. And as you can see, these are stout loads. And I highly recommend standing off on the left side or right side so you're not in front of the muzzle under recoil. There you have it, 5 shots. So for this load, we're changing it up and going from one extreme to the other. This load is using a Rimrock semi-wad cutter flat base, 270 grain bullet sized to .452 inches. We're using 7 grains of Trail Boss, Remington 7.5 primer, and an overall length of 1.715 inches. So this should be a really nice light recoiling load. Let's go ahead and see how it looks through the Ransom rest. Big difference there. Moving along to the more mid-range of our loading spectrum here, we're using Unique powder, an 11 grain charge, which is a max load, 270 grain rim rock cast semi-wad cutter flat base, size to .452 inches. Remington 7.5 primers and Starline cases. Overall loaded length 1.715 inches. Let's go ahead and see how it does, and we'll take note of the recoil in the ransom rest. Shot number 5. For this load, we're using IMR 4227, a 29.5 grain charge, and a 325 grain Barnes Buster bullet, Remington 7.5 primers, Starline cases, and an overall length of 1.765 inches. Go ahead, put them through the rest, see how they shoot. There's our 5. For this load, we're changing it up a little bit. We're using Hodgdon long shot powder, a 13 grain charge, 250 grain Nosler jacketed hollow point, Remington 7.5 primers, Starline cases, and an overall length of 1.7190 inches. Here we go. Okay, for this load we're using Lil Gun powder, a 29 grain charge, 250 grain Barnes Xpb, Remington 7.5 primers, Starline cases, and an overall length of 1.780 inches per Barnes suggestion. Here we go, let's go ahead and see how they do. So we went ahead and swapped cylinders here, and we have a 45 Colt cylinder now in our Model 83. And I got a couple of my 45 Colt pet loads here. So for this load, we're using unique powder, an 8-grain charge, a Remington cast round nose 250 grain bullet, Starline brass, Federal 150 primers, loaded to an overall length of 1.670 inches. Let's go ahead and see how well these guys group. Well, from where I stand, that looks very impressive. I also want to note that we didn't adjust anything when we swapped the cylinders. We simply lifted up the gun, unscrewed this guy here, pulled out, popped in the new cylinder, and our point of impact stayed true. Pretty impressive. Okay, so we've swapped out the 45 Colt cylinder now for the 45 ACP cylinder and made no adjustments to elevation or windage, so we'll see if our point of impact stays true. This load I'm using is using 4.3 grains of tight grip powder, a 200 grain cast semi-wad cutter from Oregon Trail, Federal 150 primers, Starline cases, and an overall loaded length of 1.215 inches. Let's see how these guys do. From here, the point of impact looks pretty good, and looks like a pretty good grip to me. So we just got back from the range. We've got a ton of targets, a ton of data, and I'm super excited to dive into it. So let's take a look at the first load we have here. We use H110 Lil Gun powder, a 20 grain charge. We got a standard deviation of 13 and a group size of 0.91 inches. Not bad for the first group of the day, and I'm pretty impressed with those. Anything under an inch, I'm going to be pretty happy with. And that's a pretty stout load using the 360 grain Oregon Trail wide nose flat point with the gas check. So the next load we thought we'd totally switch it up and go to a really light recoiling load. We use 7 grains of Trail Boss powder and a 270 grain Rimrock semi-wad cutter flat base. We got a standard deviation of 8, and our group size with our flyer, which thankfully is not on me this time, that was actually a flyer. We had that gun locked down in a ransom rest, and it's 100% repeatable, which you'll see as we go through our targets. But we had a 1.44 inch group with the flyer and a 0.65 inch group without the flyer. And the standard deviation is actually pretty dang good, 8. I'm pretty impressed with that. Trail Boss is a pretty unique powder. It's that donut looking powder, and it's great for reduced loads. I would say the recoil on that is pretty comparable to a 45 Colt with a fairly light load, 800 feet a second, give or take. Then to close out our cast bullets here, we used unique powder, a personal favorite of mine, an 11 grain charge, getting up there towards max, depending on your data source. Rimrock semi-wad cutter, 270 grain bullet. We got a 0.540 inch group. That's really impressive. I'm really happy with that. That's like half an inch out of a revolver. I'm not complaining at all. Standard deviation of 9. This is a great mid-range load if you wanted something that's fun to shoot but still got some power behind it. And also I should note, we used a lot of Oregon Trail and Rimrock cast bullets, and they were sized to .452 inches. Now some other manufacturers I've seen, when it comes to the cast bullets, they won't chamber in the cylinder. They'll get hung up because they're oversized. And then you'd have to take them to a lubicizer and size them back down. We had no issues with the Oregon Trail or the Rimrock bullets when it came to sizing. They were spot on, which is really nice to see. And now we're going to move into our jacketed data here. IMR 4227, I like this powder a lot, 29.5 grain charge, and that grouped into a .91 inch group as well. Standard deviation of 7 with the 325 grain Barnes Buster. And you'll notice the point of impact on that is a bit of a shift. It's up towards the top of the target. That's where the adjustable sights really come in handy. But we wanted to show you that point of impact shift on the rest there. That way you guys could see where to adjust your sights. And then we move on to the best load of the day. This used Hodgdon long shot powder. I think this is kind of a hidden gem of a powder if you ask me. I absolutely love it. We used a 13 grain charge, got a standard deviation of 15, and this grouped 5 shots into .28 inches. That's really outstanding, and it just goes to show you what this revolver is capable of with the right load. Extreme accuracy. Very happy with it, very impressed with it. And we even bumped the charge weight up to 14 grains, and we still got exceptional accuracy. I think that grouped into a .3 inch group. But definitely something to look into if you load for the 454. Then for our final 454 load, we used Lil Gun powder and a Barnes Xpb bullet. These were these highly compressed loads that I was talking about. We did use some H110, but it didn't quite make the cut. This is our best group with the Xpb at 1 inch. Kind of a high standard deviation and extreme spread, but I think if we had more time and we could have tweaked it, we could have shrunk those numbers down and maintained accuracy, because you can see a little bit of vertical stringing going on there. So then we did something interesting and changed it up. We took our 45 Colt cylinder with the gun locked down in the rest, pulled the 454 cylinder out, removed the base pin set screw here, pulled it out, swapped cylinders, and then we shot. And this 45 Colt cylinder maintained the same point of impact as the 454 cylinder, which is very impressive, and it goes to show you just how well made and tight the tolerances are on this. I used a pet load of mine, 8 grains of unique, with a 250 grain Remington cast round nose. That's one of my favorite bullets for a 45 Colt. It's discontinued now, sadly. Remington no longer produces it. But if you happen to find a box at a gun show or something, buy them up. They shoot really well. The only downside to them is they're a little dirty the way they lube them up. That grouped into a .69 inch group. Pretty outstanding. So then we went ahead and swapped to our 45 auto cylinder. And again, no point of impact shift. There was a little bit of it, but I think that could be chalked up to the load. And again, outstanding quality control on these guys. To be able to swap between 454, 45 Colt, and 45 ACP and maintain the same point of impact, very impressive. It's also a testament to the repeatability of the ransom rest that we used. So I used tight group powder and a 200 grain semi-wad cutter from Oregon Trail. And we got a standard deviation of 5, which is really good, and a .77 inch group. So there you have it. There's the results, and personally, I really am happy with this revolver. I absolutely love it. One of these days, I'm definitely going to have to get one of my own, maybe right after we finish this video. But all biased aside, the revolver was 100% reliable. The cartridge is heavy and hard hitting, and I wouldn't hesitate to use it for any hunting purposes. The overall fit and finish on this guy is just, it's beautiful. The lines are clean, the stocks fit perfectly, The trigger pull is outstanding, and the lockup is tight. I don't know what more you could ask for. So I'd encourage you guys to check it out, look into it for yourself. I know they're on the expensive side of things, but you do really get what you pay for. So we want to thank you so much for watching. We do appreciate it. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, be sure to leave them in the comments below. We read all of those. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you liked it. We'll be sure to catch you on the next episode, and until then.